Hello and welcome to the DTC Podcast. I'm Eric Dick. Today, before we get started with today's Apparel podcast with Jacob Rokeach, Fractional CMO, I wanted to just take a quick moment and make a request to the DTC listeners. We know we've got thousands of DTC listeners out there who get a lot of value from this show. And if you're one of those listeners listening right now, I want to give you a personal mission of helping us find new listeners. We want to grow the podcast as much as we can this year, and I'd love your help with doing it. So if you love this podcast, take it on as a personal mission to get one other person to listen to the DTC podcast. Someone else who either wants to build a business or is building a business, building a career in this world of e-commerce digital marketing. Bring them in to the DTC family. Thanks a lot. Now, let's get on with this show. Today, we are doing a deep dive on some of the best practices on how to build a lasting brand in the apparel space with ecom veteran, fractional CMO, Jacob Rokeach. Listen to this podcast and you'll learn all about smart inventory management, omni-channel approaches that brands of any size can execute, how to structure your meta ad account in our creative as targeting world, as well as scaling your business as well as your career thoughtfully, and lots more. I hope you enjoy this one. On with the show.
We're looking at the personalization more even in the retargeting side. So someone's come to the site, they've engaged with either a category or a specific product, but they haven't made a purchase yet. How do we keep that customer engaged on that product? So how do we start telling that story on one product specifically? So not just dynamic ads like, hey, you looked at this shirt, come check out this shirt. But hey, you looked at this shirt. Did you see that we have 5 other colors? Did you know that this shirt is sweat wicking and you can put it in the wash? We've seen examples from Vuori. They do a great job of this. If you look at one of their joggers, they have tons of products, but if you looked at one of their joggers, you'd actually get retargeted with specific ads for the jogger for the next 10 days. And so I think personalizing creative that way based off of the potential customer, I think is one way we're working on that from a creative and targeting standpoint.
Creative minds, math-obsessed media buyers. To ship more winning ads, you need both worlds working together. Introducing Thumbstop, the weekly newsletter by Motion that covers the art and the science of creating winning Meta, TikTok, and YouTube ads. Every Sunday, you'll learn about the science. Think about CAC and contribution margin spreadsheet tutorials, advanced ad analysis techniques, and interviews with elite media buyers. You'll build your analytical skills every week. The art. Creative cheat codes, winning TikTok ad formats, interviews with creative directors. You'll get practical ideas to ship winning ads faster and new ways to fix the brand performance divide. Subscribe at motionapp.com/thumbstop. Nice to be in contact with you here. Let's just kick it off. I think I got an intro to you from Joseph Siegel from Feastables. He's like, you got to interview this Jacob guy. He's a master marketer. So I'm curious, and after we did a pre-interview and we went deep on your experience in apparel, and I'm really interested. It's one of my favorite categories personally, and you don't have to give up your big idea because I know you're working on some ideas right now. But if you were starting an apparel brand right now in 2023, what would be really top of mind for you about how you approach that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think apparel's a great space, and if you do it right, margins are great, and I think everybody wants it and needs it. I think there's some ways that make apparel really tough. Things that make apparel really tough, right? You're holding on to tons of inventory. It's pretty seasonal a lot of times, so you don't want to keep stuff. A lot of times, you're keeping stuff on your shelf, and you don't want to keep it there for 6 months or a year, and so you have to get rid of things. And so I think to combat some of that, I think there's some interesting things that when it comes to production. How if you can do made to order, or if you can do order things and get them 75% of the way produced, and then do that last 25% after orders were placed, or once sort of the demand for something. So I think there's some creative ways you can do that depending on what the apparel actually is or what the end product is. So I think that's one thing. I think planning and buying and really forecasting, I think, can make a huge difference. And so I learned a lot at Anina Bing when I was there in house, and we had an awesome CFO, and he taught me a lot, and pushed me a lot, but also taught me a lot about thinking. We were doing forecasting 15 months in advance, every month, 15 months in advance, because we're doing our buys 9 to 12 months in advance, and really understanding, okay, if this is how much demand you think you can drive on both the e-commerce and the retail side, then let's look at where that comes down to from a product or a SKU, from a SKU availability or SKU, how you buy it. I think what we also did is we were doing that, and then we also coupled that with really understanding our evergreen, sort of like our always on styles that we knew were going to do really well. And we had this function really called like ABC, and other brands do this too. I've heard it, but A's were our things that we knew were going to do great. Proven bodies, maybe in a different color, or a proven body. So let's just say, a t-shirt that's, this fit, but so it's a proven body, but let's do it in a few different colors. So we know that this sells really well, but we haven't tried, a gray or a green or a brown, right? And so like, you know that that's your A style. The B styles were things that you believed in, but you weren't sure, as much as the A's. And then the C's were maybe some things that looked awesome. They might be like higher fashion, a little bit more, progressive, but you wouldn't buy as heavy in those. And so I think just being really smart about how you buy and plan.
And then on top of that, you've got all those different styles, and then you have 4 or 5 different sizes within each of those as well. So that complicates things. Yeah,
right. So like basics, you're extra small to extra large, let's say on the standard, right? So that's one thing. If you're looking at shoes, it's even larger. If you're looking at denim, it's even bigger. And so I think you have to be really careful.
Okay, so we're going to be really smart about our inventory. What about when it comes, and I liked your point about, I think, your point about being able to meet the market where it's at, be a little bit more bespoke. I think the word bespoke came from this idea of tailors. So this idea that you could actually order clothes that are, maybe even like what is it, like Son of a Tailor does really well with that, where you kind of go, in order to buy, you kind of have to go through their bespoke funnel. So you see that being a big opportunity for brands in the future. Is that because production, apparel production is really innovating, and is that one of the reasons that becomes more possible?
Yeah, I mean, so I think bespoke is interesting. I think it's hard, right? Indochino is like, they're men's suiting and they do some women's stuff, but like they're actually very much like made to order, and they've done it at a larger scale. I think it's hard to like, how do you do the volume and how do you scale that? I think that's the biggest problem when it comes to that. I think there's also some like in between, right? So there's Suit Supply is a really good example. I think they've done a really good job of like, you buy it off the rack, but you customize it in the store. And so like, you're not doing a completely custom thing, although they offer that, but like they have the same suit, but you can pull in the legs, you pull in the back, you maybe add something, and they're doing a lot of that, with their tailors in-house. So that's sort of that like middle ground when it comes to like, let's say suiting. I think there's some other things when it comes to like apparel manufacturing, which is like, you're using the same, let's say the same, yarn or the same material, and you're using that across a bunch of different SKUs or bodies, and then you're cutting it and exactly what you need, but like you're saving that last 25% for stitching, embroidery, branding, some other things, some like the custom stuff that like you could do it across a few different styles.
Very interesting. And the other piece to me is brand. I've been thinking a lot about Aviator Nation. I had them on the podcast a little while ago, but they basically make like I don't know, like I'm wearing a Champion sweatshirt right now. I'm sure their stuff is a little bit better feeling, maybe hangs a little bit better. It says higher quality things, but this, costs $30 or something like that. And one of their t-shirts will cost, $250. So they've done such a good job at anchoring that brand into that high value space. What do you have to say about brand and value perception?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's huge, and I think people will spend a little bit more money for brand. I think it's also sometimes lightning in a bottle, right? There's some really great brands out there that haven't been able to make it because there's just so much to choose from, and I think that's why apparel is so difficult. Yeah, I mean, I think there's just so much competition. Aviator Nation, they've been at it for a long time, and I live in Southern California. It's been prevalent here for 15 years, since before that. So it's always been here, but not across the rest of the country. And so like, it took them a while. I mean, you know the story, but like, they didn't sell and make what they made over the last few years. It took them a while. And it's a great story, and they kept at it.
And it's an omni-channel story too, right? And they did omni-channel in a really smart way by turning their boutiques into these like really high-end experiences as well, right? So they took a really unbeaten path there. But I think that, and by being very localized, as you say, right? Like things like Las Vegas and California, and just like it's like Hard Rock Cafe of apparel, right?
Yeah. And the store experience is really cool, and it definitely has a vibe, and you want to go in there, especially if you're traveling and not from California. If you're in California, it feels like you're walking in. They have one on Abbot Kinney, which is a very cool place in LA and Venice, and it's just a very cool shop. So
nice. So you work as a fractional CMO for a few apparel brands. What are some of the big themes you're seeing with apparel brands, like being hyper relevant when it comes to the marketing side of things?
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about this last week. I think I think omni-channel is definitely something that can't be left unseen or that rock turned over. And when I say omni-channel, I mean meeting that customer where she wants to be or where he wants to be. I think we all love the idea of D2C. I've been in D2C for 15 years. Love to own that customer experience. Love to be able to have someone's email address and have my own communication with them. But the customer also wants other touch points, and so I think it's important to try to meet the customer where they want to be. I think there's some smart ways to do it. And so when we talk about omnichannel for apparel, right, it's D2C, so on your own .com. It's potentially through wholesale partners. So there's the big guys, right? When it comes to apparel, there's the big box, the Nordstrom, Bloomingdale's, Saks on the high end side. You're selling to them. There's also the higher end marketplaces that are D2C, so the Farfetches and the Essences and those. And then there's your own brick and mortar retail. And so I think those are the areas that you think about. I think there's a smart way to do it. Again, we did it pretty smart when I've been in house at places, and I think also some of the brands I'm working with, you do it in a smart way. So do you launch on Nordstrom as an apparel brand or in Bloomingdale's? Do you do it in every single store that they have? I mean, that might cannibalize your direct-to-consumer business, and I think there's a way to be smart about it. Maybe you're just opening in, 10 Nordstroms and 10 Bloomingdale's, and they're at their their top locations where your customer is, or they're in locations where you don't have a retail presence, your own retail presence, and you're using wholesale to sort of be, be that canary in the coal mine, right? To find if you do have an audience there, and let wholesale sort of run it instead of opening your own retail. You can let them go first, right? Dallas, Texas is a great idea. I worked with a brand that didn't have any presence in Texas at all, and they opened with Nordstrom, which has a great presence in Dallas. And then they saw that they had a huge audience there. Then they opened up 2 retail stores in Dallas like 3 years later. So I think there's some really interesting things that you can use that to your advantage, and also be smart about it.
So within the digital realm, when you bring clients on for growth, what channels are you advocating as like a must on the digital marketing side? I guess it's brand specific, but
when you say channels, do you mean marketing channels?
Marketing channels, yeah.
Yeah. Right. I think we're in a lot of the usual spots. Right? We spend, a majority of the budget on Meta. Spend a lot of budget on Google. We actually saw this year Bing has been picking up just because their partnership with ChatGPT and all that. So that's been interesting. And then we're testing on other platforms all the time. So we're pretty bullish on connected TV. So we work with Mountain a lot. If you know that, they have some pretty interesting targeting options, and I think that's really interesting. We're pretty bullish on TikTok. It serves a place and a purpose. I think it's pretty hard to keep up with the content. So I think that, we go into it and we work with our brands and I've worked with partners. Like, what does this look like? What does this look like for the next 3 months? Because you can't just tiptoe into it. TikTok eats up content. We're trying out Pinterest, right? And so how does Pinterest work when it comes to apparel? I think what we've seen is if the brand really has a great presence organically on Pinterest, that the paid works even better. If you're not that active organically on Pinterest, you could still do paid, but I think it definitely doesn't land as well. So that was an interesting learning over the past, I'd say 12 months, is like a brand. We've been testing multiple brands on Pinterest for, doing that. And the brands that have a big organic presence, their performance is much better on the paid side.
Reminds me of Reddit. I know Reddit. Like if you're not a Redditor, if you don't have Reddit credit and you try to go do ads there, I find that can be really challenging.
Yeah. Also Reddit, if it's not your audience
in general,
they'll eat you up. So
yeah, 100%. Nice. Okay. So you got, I want to know what are your opinions on Amazon and apparel?
Yeah, Amazon made a big push into doing, the commoditized stuff, the basics. I think Amazon is doing, and they'll continue to do. I think they were really trying to make a push into fashion. I don't know, was that like 5 years ago, where they had like Amazon luxury, and I think you don't see that as much anymore. I still think that Amazon doesn't do a great job of having personality with brands. So when you put your brand on there, it's really hard to have the personality of the brand come across. And I think a lot of us use Amazon for the things that we love about it. But I still think that, again, you meet your customer where they are. I'd much rather sort of shop a curated collection on a brand's website when I'm, trying to figure out what it is, versus like buying a pair of socks. I'll buy a pair of socks anywhere. Well, I'm very particular about my socks personally, but just an example. But when Todd Snyder is a brand I really like from a menswear brand. If that was on Amazon, I would never shop it. It's not the type of curation I want. They don't do the collections. They don't do those things. And so I think Todd Snyder, which also sells Champion, and they have a cool collaboration, you'd see that and you sort of like comes off the page, and you don't get that with Amazon. So I think brand doesn't come across.
It's pretty commoditized experience. But it's always interesting. There are some brands I do like that do sell on Amazon, and it's just become such an easy thing to buy there. Super interesting. I wanted to, so you mentioned in the pre-interview as well, something about media mix modeling, which is something we barely talk about. And I know that's sort of like I've heard different opinions on it about like, it's really only valuable at like a really incredible scale. I'm just curious, how do you build media mix modeling into your mindset with all these channels?
Yeah. So, I think we started doing it on a smaller, more manual scale, where I'm not sure if I'd call it completely media mix modeling, but it was sort of like the base of that, right? Without using machine learning and all that stuff. And so I think you and I talked about this is like, what do you do in a cookieless world, right? As we start moving more into this cookieless world, like, what do you do? And I think and the way I look at it is new customers and acquisition, and then retention. I think there's two ways to look at it. So as it relates to acquisition and where you're putting your media dollars, I think we have to be smarter about understanding the relationship between where we're spending the budget and the dollars and what happens. And we used to have attribution that was much better. You knew that when you spent, for the most part, like, you'd have some pretty good. If I spent $1,000, I knew what happened to that $1,000 and the people that it drove and what they did. Now, when you spend $1,000, you probably only know about 30% of them, or whatever the number is. It might be less, but you know about what 30% of those dollars did and what they helped drive. So I think there's being able to do some correlation analysis is a thing that we do a lot. And so correlation being things like, okay, we're going to do something here. We're going to understand a baseline. So set a baseline of whether it's traffic coming from a specific source or a specific geography. Let's establish a baseline, and then let's start doing some small hypotheses and hypothesis testing. So let's increase our spend here, and let's see what happens across different data points. So one, did brand search go up when we increased our top of funnel spending? Did brand search in specific area go up? So if we do micro tests, you can look at geographies. So let's look at San Francisco and Los Angeles and Dallas, and let's see what happens when we increase top of funnel spending in those areas only. And let's see what happens to brand search in those areas. Let's see what happens to traffic in those areas. Let's see what happens in the first week, and the second week, and the third week, and let's start to understand that correlation between increases in incrementality in spending and other things. So I think that's like, we can all do that. Like, you don't need to have machine learning and a data scientist to do that. I think you can get a little bit more sophisticated and start doing regression analysis, where you start understanding how all of these data points working together will actually help, your line and what happens to that line. And so understanding the deviation. So I think that's a little bit more complex. And then I think you go to the next step, which is there's some things that we're working on doing. It's some more like media mix modeling, and we're bringing on some data scientists to help like build out this sort of machine learning idea, which is how do you do micro tests and a bunch of them in an hour or in a day, instead of waiting, a week to understand data and whatnot. You can do micro tests on certain things. So we're trying to play in that space, and I think that is one way of the future.
That's super interesting. It's an interesting time with meta ads, because it's still this hyper effective and by far the biggest volume in terms of the ability to reach people. The targeting has been degraded in some ways, which is something else we talked about. And so there's these other ways that you can sort of structure what you're doing, whether it's measuring things on media mix modeling. How do you advocate structuring Facebook accounts these days, meta accounts?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think we're still pretty bullish on breaking up the funnel, understanding net new customers who've never heard, or potential customers. So prospecting, having this middle of funnel. So these are customers who have potentially heard of the brand, so they've engaged with an ad, they've been to the website, they put something in their cart, right? So we like to break up the funnel between cold and warmer in that middle of funnel, and then down to sort of retention, right? And so we're pretty bullish on breaking things up in the funnel in that way. The reason being is I'd say two or threefold, right? First is So we know how we're doing across each part of that funnel, and we can actually gauge ourselves week over week, month over month, and understand sort of differences of efficiency within the funnel, cost within those different areas of the funnel, what it costs to get someone to engage with an ad, and you can do some comparisons. If you're just throwing everything together, it's a little bit harder to have a benchmark. So from one thing is just understanding and being able to analyze. The next part is creative. So, someone who's never heard of your brand before, telling them about how, the cost and the effectiveness and the value propositions, that might not be as enticing as like making, having a stronger sort of brand message, right? Having that more sort of ephemeral connection with somebody, or that sort of, that more, that deeper connection with somebody that they feel and they have a response to the brand. Emotional response to the brand, yeah. And I think further down the funnel, I think you start testing out what works, right? So there's value prop messaging, whether it goes from apparel. I work with a lot of skincare brands, right? So value prop really matters there. It's clean, it's green, there's no redness. So how do you communicate that? The cost. So I think there's a lot of things in the middle of the funnel that someone might not have responded to higher up on the funnel. So creative is a big thing for us as to why we break it up that way. Yeah.
I was going to say, what about personal? One of the themes that keeps coming up on the podcast is just personalization as well, with that ability. And I think it's probably even more, apparel is such a personal item, multi-SKU in most cases. What do you advocate when it comes to personalization in terms of do you like, I just had this idea that come up on the podcast the other day from Sean Frank about how he, in their marketing funnels, people get these objects of desire for his Ridge wallets or whatever. And then after 30 days in funnel, he liquidates that funnel and sends them a product specific, hyper big discount for a specific product, and then kind of gets them back into the overall mix. I'm curious, how do you approach personalization when it comes to probably, I guess, retention on the retention side of things?
Yeah, so we're looking at the personalization, I think, a little bit more even in the retargeting side. So someone's come to the site, they've engaged with either a category or a specific product, but they haven't made a purchase yet. So we're actually working on how do we keep that customer engaged on that product? So how do we start telling that story on one product specifically? So not just dynamic ads like, hey, you looked at this shirt, come check out this shirt. But hey, you looked at this shirt. Did you see that we have 5 other colors? Did you know that this shirt is, sweat wicking and it's dry fit and you can put it in the wash and all these things. So really going down the level just on that specific shirt, right? I think we've seen examples from Vuori. They do a great job of this. If you look at one of their joggers, right, you can see the jogger and they make sure they have tons of products. But if you looked at one of their joggers, or they're called the core jogger or something like that, you'd actually get retargeted with specific ads for the jogger for the next 10 days. And so I think personalizing creative that way based off of, the viewer, potential customer, I think is one way we're working on that from a creative and targeting standpoint.
Very cool. And you mentioned, we talked a little bit, we teased a little bit about inventory management. It's something, as coming from the agency side of things, now a media company, we don't handle a lot of inventory and forecasting. I wanted to dive back in a little bit. Do you have any actual strategies or frameworks that you use to kind of avoid overbuying or underbuying?
Yeah. Good forecasting. And I think the way, there's 2 ways that I've done it in the past. And I think you can do this despite, regardless of what vertical you're in. So the bottoms up approach, which is what are the building blocks of your revenue? It's new customers and repeat customers. And I think if you're understand your repeat customer rate and how often they repeat. So I like to look at it from a cohort standpoint. So when a customer first became a customer, and then how many times does that customer come back over, let's say, a 12-month time period? I think you can get down pretty close to what your repeat revenue will be over a 12-month time period, right? If things don't change drastically, if you have a similar inventory mix, if you are coming out with the same sort of newness, if you're spending the same, doing the same on the retention activities, for the most part, retention is a scientific approach, right? So you're just looking at cohorts by the date that they came in, so the month that they came in, and understanding repeat rate. And then you can sort of look at your, each month, how many new customers you're bringing in, and you apply a repeat rate to those customers. You can look at seasonality, and you can look at some other things, but 12 months, I think it's pretty scientific. Then you layer on top of new customers. And so I think that's where it gets a little bit more art and science, which is understanding, if I want to scale, if I were to spend, let's say 20 or 30% more than I spent the month before, how does that affect my CAC, right? CAC meaning the blended CAC. So if I have this much spend and I brought in this many new customers. Here's my blended CAC. How does that change as I spend more money? And so that's where, the art and science, I think, start to come together. But that's one way to forecast, really understanding sort of new and repeat customers. And then you back into, how many orders they're going to place, what your AOV is, what your units per transaction are. Then you can really get down to like, okay, how many SKUs do I need to have? Or how many units of each SKU do I need to have? So I think that's one way to go about it. You can also go sort of, we call it bottoms up, or you go top down, which is understanding your traffic, taking a look at new users or new visitors versus repeat visitors, understanding the conversion rate and how they with the difference between new and repeat conversion rate on a visitor basis, understanding the AOV of new and repeat, and then breaking that down into a similar way. So I think there's a couple ways you can do it, and you can also, that top down, you can really look at channels. So are my organic channels bringing in most of the repeat customers or the new customers, and understanding like where you need to push and what you need to do, what levers you need to pull. And that helps on sort of the marketing side.
Very cool. And then, of course, you throw in Q4 planning as well. Apparel is probably one of the biggest impacted verticals when it comes to Q4, like ad spending and growth. I think I've heard the rule of thumb that in some brands, Q4, kind of makes as much revenue as the other quarters combined. Is that something? What do you sort of see in terms of how big a deal Q4 is for apparel brands?
Yeah, I mean it's a huge deal. I mean, we've already started prepping for Black Friday, Cyber Monday. We started 2 weeks ago. We created a cool checklist and all these things, what you do on the retention side and some things to think about. And so we've been working with our brands and with some of the brands that I consult with, and getting people prepped already. And what's the offer, making sure we have enough inventory to support it, and all of that. So yeah, it's huge. I think it's getting bigger and bigger. I think there's no secret that Black Friday, Cyber Monday used to be 4 or 5 days long, right? You used to start on Thanksgiving Day maybe, or the day after, and you used to run through Monday at the end of the day. I mean, the last, I'd say, COVID, but even before COVID, I mean, it's now running all of November. I mean, we have brands that are starting the first week of November, a few days after that, whatever it is. And it's like everyone's doing that. The whole month of November, they're on sale. So I think it's becoming more competitive. It drives up prices on the platforms. I think customers are now also trained, right? I think this October will be really interesting to see how many people are shopping in October full price. I think people are anticipating, like, why am I going to spend if I've got $1,000 to spend on something new, I'm going to wait to November because I know there's going to be 20, 30, 40% off. So I think it's going to affect everybody. And
it's going to be an interesting Q4 this year. I know Prime Day. I know there was a number of like leading indicators so far, like that it looks like it'll be just as big of a Q4, if not bigger than before. But I think that's a really key point. That's something the team at Pilot House talks about all the time, is just making sure that your offers are really tested in these months and weeks ahead of time, so that you know exactly how you're going to word it, what you're going to be offering, how you word your discount, so that when it's time to go, you're ready to spend.
Yeah. Where do you do your shopping at? Where do you do your apparel shopping at?
It's funny. I just bought a nice fall outfit from one of my favorite retailers called The Last Hunt. And they sell high-end like sports gear and just nice apparel as well. It's like a marketplace, but they sell it all at like 40. It's like last season stuff, so it's all like 40 or 60% off or something. And I just always go by biggest discount. I feel like that's a big miss for apparel companies, that they don't have that on their filter options. Filter by I guess a lot aren't discount brands, but filter by biggest discount. I like, especially ones that have lots of inventory. I want to go find like the really high-end stuff that's like 90% off because it's got a crazy color that I happen to love. That's what I'm on the last hunt for. Okay,
I like it. I'm going to check it out. And just
how about you?
Well, right now I'm going to a wedding in Italy. We're first trip without the kids for in like 3 years. So I'm buying a linen suit, which is nice. So
nice.
Doing that with Suit Supply. So I'm a big fan of theirs. What else?
I just bought linen bedding from a previous podcast guest, by the way, and I feel I went down some rabbit holes on like linen as a fabric and like how it like helps with like human resonance. I don't even know if it's true, but like I'm a big linen fan, so that's
I'll buy into that.
Yeah, I like it. My Taurus field is strong.
Yeah, I'm into that. I like Todd Snyder a lot, which is a cool brand out of New York. So they're doing some cool things. Ministry of Supply, who I love a lot.
Oh, yeah.
So if you're looking for that work, they're a client of mine, and just love working with them. The team's just so sharp, and MIT grads who sat and basically backed into like how to create the most breathable fabric that you don't need to take to the dry cleaner, that is stretchy and comfortable, but looks super professional. So work leisure is what they call it. So I think their stuff is awesome.
It's just amazing how fast fashion changes. I remember like 3 years ago being like, I would never wear a pair of jeans without stretch in them in my life. And now I only have like 1993, like 501, like sort of straight leg jeans, because you can't wear skinny pants anymore. Like that happened quick.
Yeah. The question is, do you save it? Are you going to save your skinny jeans? Do you think they're going to come back? Because I got rid of all my Jankos and my wide leg jeans from when I was in high school, and now I'm beating myself up because those are the jam now.
I'm really glad you brought up Jinkos, because I would like to I think we need to get Jinkos on the podcast. The last area I wanted to chat about with you was celebrity brands, because we've talked a long time about how every brand is becoming a media company. I knew every celebrity was going to vertically integrate into brands. It's been happening a lot. You see this trend just not slowing down at all, eh?
Yeah, I think I work with a bunch of celebrity brands, probably 6 or 7 now on the roster, and I think there's a recipe there that I think works, right? You talk to a lot of DTC brands, and I think you probably talk to a lot of the ones that are successful, and they've been able to find traffic, find product market fit, and do all this stuff probably without a celebrity. And I think they're probably the diamonds in the rough. And I think there's a lot of the rough that doesn't make it, right? That you're not talking to. And so I think it's hard. I think anyone listening to this podcast knows that it's really hard, especially on the D2C side, especially when you're just launching and all that. And so I think having a celebrity really helps that, right? How do you get free traffic? Like, instead of paying $1 per session, right? We're out here spending marketing dollars, paying $1 per session or whatever the number is to get traffic to your website. Can you have a celebrity that, that is passionate about a brand, and that they start this brand, whatever it is? Can you help them, or can they sort of help drive their 10 million followers on Instagram or something to a website and convert? I think that's the thesis. I think it sounds great. To me, in order for celebrity brands to work, I think there's probably like a recipe. And I think, if I break it down into 3 things, I think that 1, the celebrity has to have an audience, and it has to be the right audience for the product. So just because you have a 10 million person audience doesn't mean that the audience is going to want the product that you're putting out there. So I think that has to work. That has to be the right.
I've got a big market. I've got a big audience of marketers, but they don't want to buy my collarless shirts necessarily, although they might.
They might. Yeah. Do they want to buy skincare from you, or like a vodka from you? I don't know. Maybe not. Well, maybe they do. I don't know.
Maybe a nice strain of marijuana, maybe. Who knows?
Yeah. So I think like the right audience for the right product, I think that's one thing. I think the second thing is the product has to be really good. I think it doesn't matter who you are. If the product's not good, people see through it. And I think you might have an early bump of people that are saying like, yeah, I'll try anything from this celebrity. And then they try it out. And if the product's no good, they're not coming back. And so like we all know that in D2C, right, retention is more important than acquisition. So if you're acquiring a bunch of customers and they don't come back, then like, what are you doing? So I think that's probably second. I think the third thing is probably staying focused and being involved. So I think the celeb having the audience, but like them not being involved and like not wanting to do stuff, but like just being passively, I don't know if that works. I think like being really involved is great. And so I think you have a lot of celeb brands where the celebrity is running things there. I mean, I think Hailey Bieber with Rhode Beauty is a great example. Like she loves, that is her thing. I mean, she's all over the website. She's posting content about it all the time. I think some of the, Ariana Grande is like, she has a brand called Rem. She's very bullish on the brand. She loves it. She is, posting about it all the time, and you can see it on TikTok and Instagram and all those things. So I think those things are really important. And I think there's other celebrity brands that you see out there that aren't doing that same thing. So, I think those are my 3 recipes.
I was going to ask I think that's pretty good. I was going to ask your opinion on the best ratio of the celebrity being involved or not. And I think you kind of nailed it. We did a chat with Emma Chamberlain's brand, and she really strikes that balance as well. I just saw that Jared Leto's skincare brand went under. So you have to be a celebrity that people really like, and don't just like ironically like they liked Morbius. Sorry, Jared Leto, if you're listening. But yeah, you have to be a quality celebrity. Although I guess every celebrity has some audience, right?
Yeah. how deep do you go with them, and how much do they trust you, and I think all those things. So yeah, that's probably my recipe. And I think we work with sub brands that are doing that, right? And they are. And then there's some other brands that aren't doing that, and we've also been able to make it work. But I think those like three things working together is just that's hard to beat.
Or just be Ryan Reynolds, and then everything you touch turns to gold. Like Mountain, you mentioned earlier, that's one of his companies, right?
Yeah. Then he sold Mint Mobile, right? I mean, guy's just amazing.
He's my white whale. He's going to come. So if you ever get to chat with him when you're in your mountain, once you ascend on the TV ad spending a little bit more, send him this way, please. Okay,
I'll make a deal with you. If I get to come on too.
Yes. Well, yeah. Okay. You can watch. So we have our 50K question, and I'm sure you're working with brands that are spending a lot more than that in a given month or whatever. But if we were to give you just an incremental $50,000 budget for one of your brands, where would you right now kind of deploy that to see the biggest return in the short term?
Such a hard question. I mean, there's so many caveats and qualifiers, right? So what's the brand? What is their product?
Okay, well, pick a brand in your mind. Pick a product. What would you do?
Yeah. So if they weren't, let's say they weren't spending any money, this is just 50K. So a brand that's spending $0, spending 50K. I think Meta and Google are still sort of the powerhouses. I think, finding new customers on Meta across the board, there's so much learning also you can get so quickly. So if you wanted to understand messaging and creative and all that stuff, 50K is a lot of budget to really understand that. I mean, you could do a test for $1,000 and get so much learning from $1,000. So being able to test 10 different images with 5 different pieces of copy, you could do that with, a tenth of that budget and really learn a ton. So I think like Meta is so powerful and can't be dismissed ever. I think Google is, a little bit of pay to play. I also think we're seeing a lot of success with Performance Max. I think the machine learning and algorithm that Google has is, again, unfortunate they're in antitrust lawsuits right now, but not for Performance Max yet. But they're it's amazing, and they do a great job. And the companies just this is their premier product, and they work on it all the time. You can tell. So.
And now they've got the YouTube top of funnel piece, right? Which was something that they had kind of missed in a lot of ways, is the actual demand generation. And so, yes, are you guys doing much on YouTube?
Yeah, we are. Yeah. So for that reason, I mean, super cheap cost per views, you're getting people that are actually clicking and engaging, and then you can retarget people that engage with a video or watch a video after a certain amount. You can retarget them elsewhere, which I think is, again, really powerful. I mean, YouTube, I think this was 5 years ago. I think is still the second, if not the second biggest search engine in the world, right? It's Google and then YouTube. So, I mean, if you think of the power that you have of like the amount of people that are there and what they're looking for, it's amazing.
So that sounds like your traffic strategy sounds good. What would be your overview of your creative strategy that you try to deploy for one of these brands?
Yeah, so we're creative is, like we've talked about, understanding creative throughout the funnel is really important. We're really bullish again on creative and doing creative strategy. I think we'd do a ton of brand research. So the way we look at it is do a ton of brand research, really understand the brand, the customer, and the psychographic of that customer, and then try to develop some hooks and angles. And I think the brand probably has an idea of what those best hooks and angles are. We love to come in and actually say, all right, we're going to do the research. We're going to actually give some hooks and angles that we want to test. And then we go out and test those things using a few different types of concepts. And when I say concepts, we like to think of creative across a couple different content clusters. So, for an apparel brand, testimonials are great, right? So like what other people are saying. Press is like a great concept. So how do you show that press is talking about this product? Another thing would be like, UGC reviews, right? Or UGC testimonials. So someone using the product and talking about how great it is and how to use it. So let's say take those 3 concepts are the things we want to test. Then we take those are the concepts we want to test. Then we try to understand what are the hero products. And then we start developing content and creative around those things. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. And then iterate, right? Yeah, iterate. So take that same concept, but test different products. Take that same concept and that same product, test different images, right? So now we're talking about, one concept, 5 products, 5 different images. I mean, you have 25 different ads right there. So it's pretty amazing. You can, flip flop and then test different things, right? So
that $50,000 is pretty much gone. I think that's the thing that we just published in the newsletter this week.
We're printing money.
This is easy. This shit's easy. We were just speaking of like easy little hacks, though. We were just in today's newsletter, DTC newsletter. We actually published something about how like it was a while ago. People were using memes, figuring out how to get really cheap clicks and views with kind of using meme ads. But apparently, we're seeing some success getting images of emojis in your images. So like actually like superimposing different emojis in your images in different places. Apparently, is working well right now. I don't know.
Oh.
Depends on the brand, I guess.
All right. Okay, that's a new thing to throw on. That's a new thing to throw on as the concept.
Nice. Yeah, exactly. Test it out. You got 50K. This is easy.
That's what we're talking. You're giving me ideas. Like, this is how we're talking. Yeah.
That's what it is. This is awesome, man. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, this is great. Yeah.
You mentioned you have a new Twitter. Where do you think people should look you up?
Yeah, I need to work on my activity there, but it's J Rokeach on X, as they say.
Nice.
And then LinkedIn, trying to stay active on LinkedIn and post some things that we're learning. Also love to do career advice and things for young people. I actually had someone ask me the other day. So this is the post I was working on yesterday. I went out to coffee with a family friend, and it was a young guy, about 24, so just out of college pretty recently. And he's like, "Well, if you give me any career, like, what would you do differently in your career? Like, you've done so many great things. You have this cool. You're an entrepreneur now. You have your own business, and what's career advice? What would you do differently?" And I had to think about it, and I was like, I actually don't know if I would do anything differently. I think that I am where I am because of the path that I took. And so I feel pretty strongly about that. I'd say like 3 things that were really important to me. And I guess I'll leave you with this just because I think it's, I love sort of trying to impart knowledge on some people who maybe can learn something from my mistakes or my successes, hopefully, or what success you call this. But I boiled down to 3 things. One was have a goal and have like a goal of what you want to be. And that can change. And I think like I actually lived with a guy, and when I was 25, we worked together, and then we ended up being roommates. And he was always about like listening to self-help stuff and reading self-help books and like working on career development. And he was like, I want to be this. And he was 25. And he's like, this is what I want to be. Whether it's 10 years or 20 years, that's what I want to be. And he actually inspired me to do that same thing. So like set a goal. So when I was 25, I was like, I want to be a CMO. I want to be a CMO of a company. And that was my goal. And so I took, you can take 5 different paths to be a CMO. And to be honest with you, I think that changed for me because CMO now is actually a little bit of a different role. Like I think the roles that I've taken are the same as a CMO, right? I was almost GMing e-commerce business at Anita Bing and took on another fashion brand. And now, fractional VP of growth or fractional chief digital officer, effectively the same thing as a CMO, just the company is a little bit different and it has a bigger reliance on data and other things. But like that goal of being CMO gave me some purpose and some things that I was driving to. So I really love that. And I sort of told him that, and it can change. So I thought that was
it's such an underrated point. It's funny. I remember my first professional job was at a vanity press called Trafford Publishing, and the CFO of that company was in a company meeting one time, and he told this story about how he was about to retire or something. He looked back on his life, and he's like, "Wow, I guess I did everything I tried to do. I set out to do." And it's like you're going to do that one way or another. You're going to look back and think, "Oh, I coulda, shoulda, woulda," and then you will have been what or you can be like set your goals and set your goal. Might as well set your goals high too.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. So, yeah, I thought that was helpful. I think the other thing, and I'll sort of finish off here soon, but I think take internships and take jobs in things and fields that are interesting to you. So everyone says like, oh, do what you love. And I think that sounds so whimsical and awesome, but I actually don't think it's that hard. If you love the outdoors, for example, you don't have to work at a national park to like work in the outdoors. You could work at a lobbying organization. You could work at the World Wildlife Fund, or you could work at REI and like e-commerce at REI, but still like be connected to the outdoors. For me, I really loved entertainment. Like I was a big movie person since I was a kid, loved movies, loved TV, loved entertainment. And so when I moved to LA, like I wanted to work in entertainment. I saw Entourage. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to be like Ari Gold. I was so far from that, but like my first job was in production because I was like, I love this business. I want to work in production. That sounds cool. So I worked on America's Next Top Model. That was my first job, 22. I worked in sports production first, and then worked at CBS Sports, and then worked at America's Next Top Model. I never even saw the show before. Don't tell my old boss or Tyra that, but I learned a ton. I was there for a year and learned a ton, and I actually learned I didn't want to work in production. And I was like, this is not the job for me. But it was cool to work in that. And then I stayed in entertainment for 10 plus years. I worked at Sony Pictures, I worked at Hulu, I worked at NBC Universal. I stayed in entertainment because that was really exciting, but I worked in D2C and streaming and things that were sort of more cutting edge and more digital. And I really found what I liked. So I thought I think that's another sort of thing, is like work in the things that are interesting to you. I've always been into apparel and fashion. And so like for me to take a job at Anina Bing at a fashion company wasn't that far. I've always sort of fancied myself a fashionista. You can't see what I'm wearing, thank God. But it wasn't that far, and so I think I'm still doing that. I love this stuff, and what I love is obviously changed a little bit, and so I think that's important. And then the last thing is just put in the hours. I think I couldn't say that enough. Like I've just like working hard and working hard. It's like that's not the right word, but putting the hours to learn and asking questions and like looking around the room and seeing who's the smartest person in the room and then trying to figure out how they do what they do. I wasn't a business major in school. I didn't know how to use Excel when I graduated college. I mean, if now I've learned from people, and hats off to the people who took the time to like teach me a few things here and there and let me like ask them questions. I mean, I'd say like I'm, better than 80% of the MBAs out there. Maybe not that, but like I'm pretty dangerous when it comes to Excel. Never knew how to use it 15 years ago. Didn't even have it on my computer probably. And so I think learning, asking questions, staying at the office late. I mean, I was always sort of like close to the last person at the office because there's like so much to do. There's so much to read. There's so much to learn. And I think just like putting in the time, you learn and pick up all that stuff. And I think both like it shows from like an outsider's perspective, people see it. And I think they really respect hard work. And I think that's still apparent. And then I think you also learn, and you're going to be, a machine and a much better sort of employee or a leader later on. So I'd say like putting in the hours and asking the questions. And, I probably thank all the people that took the time to like teach me things or let me ask questions, whether they're stupid or not. So.
And they fit together because you're going to work hard if you're in this space that you're really interested in. I think about like building this media company, D2C. It's like we've just been heads down for 3 years. You look up and you're like, oh, wow. It's like you don't, it's like when it's working, you barely even notice it sometimes because you're just heads down and working away. Yeah. What's your favorite movie?
Favorite movie. So there's never one, and I have like a rule. I ask that. I have like there's always like a rotation of probably like 3 to 5, depending on like where I am in my life. Okay. There's a few that sort of always stay on there. So like Usual Suspects is probably like one of my favorite movies of all time.
We might be around the same age because when that came out, that was like my entree to like cool films. Yeah,
I mean it's just amazing, and so I love that movie. I think. Shawshank Redemption is probably another one that I just like love the story and love all that, and so I could watch that many times. And then Tommy Boy, just because you got to have something funny in there, and like Chris Farley was just a genius, and I could recite the entire movie.
You could sell me these brake pads right now, I'm sure.
Yeah, you could right now. It doesn't hurt so much right here or right here, but right here.
Yeah, my go-to to that question has always been Rushmore. She's my Rushmore, Max, which is Wes Anderson's second film. Bottle Rocket is his first. If the audience hasn't seen that, you got to check that out. But It was before he got too wet. I love Wes Anderson. I still like him, but he's now so Wes Anderson-y. This was when he was just figuring out how to be Wes Anderson. I think it's one of the saddest love stories ever. It's great.
Yeah, Jason Schwartzman, right?
Bill Murray's renaissance there.
Yeah.
She was my Rushmore too, Max.
She was my
Nice. Well, really, my other favorite line from that, I reference it often, is "Fuck the Barracudas. I'm building it anyway," which is how I think about D2C. I think that's really where your head's got to be at when you're building a D2C brand. Is "Fuck the Barracudas. We're building it anyway."
You should get the sign. Like, I'm going to make you the sign. Do we need the sign? I think you need the sign.
I think I need a sign that says "Fuck the Barracudas." Let's go. Awesome. Yeah. This is a lot of fun, Jacob. Let's do this again.
Yeah. Anytime. Well, thanks. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for listening to today's episode. If you're not a subscriber to our newsletter, you can do that right now at directtoconsumer.co. I'm Eric Dick, and this has been the D2C Podcast. We'll see you next time.